Today in Corinne's Picks, Michel Negroponte. Welcome. Today we have a brilliant filmmaker, Michel Negroponte. Welcome to Corinne's Picks.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
You know, I've been watching your films all week, and I've just been the conversations about being an outsider. You know, it's come to my mind after seeing all of your films. What would you say is the crust of your work?
Well, certainly one of the things that I've focused on for the last 30-something years is precisely that. It's people who live on the periphery, people who are outsiders. But I think of that, first of all, outsiders are utterly fascinating to me. And I think what I find so interesting is that they tend to have insights about the center, what we might refer to as the center, that are very, very special, precisely because they look at our world from the edge or from the periphery. And so, I can't generalize about all the subjects that I've made movies about, but I'd say in general, they're incredibly insightful, lyrical, difficult, and fascinating people.
Yeah, I know that, I want to let the audience know before I get too deep into the subject that your work has had tremendous critical acclaim. There've been won awards at Sundance. They've been aired on HBO. I know that, in fact, you're better able to tell me. Can you tell us some of the...
Well, certainly the work has been aired on HBO, on PBS, on the BBC, on European networks, on a Japanese television. So, no, it's been, in terms of television exposure, it's gotten a great deal worldwide over the years. And now we're kind of in a different world. No, I think the work has been seen. It's gotten out there, especially when it's shown on a network like HBO, or for that matter, PBS. And I've also been going to festivals for, 30 years with films, and also shown the work at museums and film societies and things of that nature.
Well, one of your pieces that got quite a bit of critical acclaim and really moved me deeply, and it's an earlier film, I believe it's like 1982, 85, Silver Valley.
Right.
It was striking to me that a film that you made in the 80s is so relevant in the now.
Wow. Boy, that goes way back. And that was made in 1984, Silver Valley. It was about a mining town in Idaho that went totally belly up. So literally everybody in that town became unemployed. And so it was sort of the making of a ghost town, or it felt that way at least. And the film focuses on a single family and their choices. Would they stay? Would they leave? It was a very, very critical point in their lives. I don't think Sundance didn't even exist at that point. It did go to some film festivals, but they were very different in those days. It takes me way far back.
The reason it's meaningful to me is because for 15 years I lived in the Bay Area. I lived in Berkeley, and for a short time I lived in Oakland. And from what I see in terms of people just struggling to just live, to have a life, to raise a family, to see, the Bay Area is seen as this very sophisticated place, but now to see tent cities spring
I
up
know.
in Oakland, California. Some places that's completely gentrified now is very hip. You know, me and my husband, we've done road trips upstate New York, and I've seen towns that are just busted,
No, I know.
just busted.
Yeah, I mean, really, sadly, that's something that has not gone away, and in the last 30 or 40 years in my lifetime, and maybe in some respects has gotten worse. And it really has to do with distribution of wealth and social services that have been decimated. I mean, this stuff is really awful. I mean, and right now, obviously, given who is in the White House, I mean, it's depressing.
Well, I feel that's the reason he got into the White House, because those smaller populations in Appalachia, in Ohio, in the South Bronx, if you want to
Yeah.
say, I can't even say the South Bronx anymore because that's gentrifying
Right.
too. But you know, these are narratives of people who you think are outsiders, who have profound dreams, who are incredibly articulate. The people in the movie, to me, they summed up their situation perfectly.
Yeah.
They were very intelligent, and I guess that would lead me into another work that you did that was also very striking. Two works that you did that were striking. One was Macedonia,
Yeah.
about the heroin epidemic
Right.
and the struggle to overcome it.
Right.
And I guess another one you did almost 15 years apart. Would it be 15 years?
Which one? I'm Dangerous with Love.
Dangerous with
Well, no,
Love.
actually, they were back to back, and I finished Macedonia. It was released in 2003. It actually showed at the New York Film
Oh,
Festival,
okay.
which was,
Okay.
and then went to HBO. And then I started making I'm Dangerous with Love. So they really were back to
Oh,
back.
wow.
And I'm Dangerous with Love was released in 2009. I mean, in very loose terms, I mean, they cover similar territory,
Right,
which
right.
is, you know, drug use and addiction. Clearly, they're very different films. Macedonia was all shot in a single location, a place where drug users, and for the most part, middle-aged and older drug users, were in group therapy. And then and on average, they might have been anywhere from 15 to 20 people who arrived at those group meetings on a daily basis. And then I chose several characters in that group and sort of focused on them, and I left the group, in effect, with them, one by one, and sort of looked at their daily lives. And so the main character is a fellow named Steve, and then it was what I would call an ensemble cast. I mean, in general, these were people who had lost everything, their families. They lived really marginal existences. And even though they had support from social services to some extent, it's a pretty basic existence. And also, you know, these are people who are in recovery, who are sadly not really following the guidelines. Almost all of the people in Macedonia in this group, in these group meetings, were on methadone.
Right, right.
Or methadone maintenance, which, if it's used properly, can be effective, but they were not using it properly, and in many cases, and it's one of the things that I discovered when I made the film, I didn't know anything about this, is that in the very beginning, there was a lot of discussion about pills and using pills, and I didn't quite understand what that was all about. And what I learned fairly quickly, I guess, is that people on methadone were using benzodiazepines on top of the methadone, things like Klonopin and Xanax, and for reasons that, I mean, I can't explain, but most people who are, you know, long-term drug users and people who are also on methadone maintenance know that if you combine benzodiazepines with methadone,
Right.
you get a heroin-like high.
Right.
And so very often on the streets of New York, if you see people nodding out, sadly, many of those are people who are on methadone and abusing that medicine by using benzodiazepines on top of it. And the combination is really deadly. And I mean, one of the things that happened when the film came out, I think because it was on HBO and it was quite widely seen, I think that the use of benzodiazepines for people on methadone maintenance has been monitored far more carefully because it can be a really deadly combination.
But I think that film is incredibly important because you see clearly how difficult that addiction is and how helpless that there's almost it's a struggle to get out of it.
Yeah.
And I think you take I think the audience, somebody who's never taken drugs, could take the addiction more seriously. A lot of times we think, well, if only they would try harder.
Oh.
But you see, it's a very intimate look at heroin addiction.
Right. Yeah. I think of Methadonia as an essay film about addiction. And I think it's a subject that people think they understand, but in fact very few people do. And, they use the disease model when they talk about addiction. And I guess that can be somewhat abstract. I can understand why people don't entirely get it. Nonetheless, people who have been using drugs for a long time, they have neural pathways that have probably been readjusted, and this is no longer about willpower, and to blame drug users for the plight that they're experiencing is, well, frankly, it's pretty stupid.
Well, I feel that Dangerously with Love,
Yeah.
I feel that one of the characters in that film really said it well when they say that Americans have forgotten how to dance.
Yeah.
And I feel that a lot of drug addiction
Yeah.
is a cultural deficit that we have as Americans. I feel that people feel so alienated and empty that, I mean, the drug consumption in this country, we have to start to reflect on that a little bit more. Like,
Right.
what is the cause of such a appetite for drugs that we're supporting cartels in South America and Mexico
Right.
with our addiction or our
Yeah.
emptiness?
Yeah, the quote is actually a quote that's right at the beginning of I'm Dangerous with Love, and it was a shaman in West Africa, a Bwiti shaman, who actually said that to me. And he said, in America, they have forgotten how to dance in the village. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a great deal of truth to that. I think we feel oppressed by the daily grind and this thing called super capitalism, which is so, the stress and just to simply get by for so many people destroys their spirit. Living without hope is devastating.
There's also a heavy emphasis on materialism, and I feel like generationally we have less and less emphasis on our social relationships with each other. I believe, we talk about the rise of autism. I think it's a lot of people who are not autistic, we're behaving like we're autistic. Like, we are becoming more and more separate, staring into our phones all day, spending most of our times online. There's a certain vacuum, and, we don't emphasize community as much as we used to a few generations ago.
Well, clearly things have changed a lot in the last 100 years, and I think you're right, a sense of community. And look, we're moving into a new and different world. Call it the digital age, call it the 21st century. Nothing is going to stop that. It has a momentum of its own. So I think younger people have to figure out a way to integrate technology into their lives without losing the spirit, without losing kind of a spiritual edge. You know, I think many of us, as we get older, start to think about, you know, the more spiritual aspects of living and dying, for that matter. And I'm certainly in that stage in my life. I mean, I'm in the third act, you know, and there is no fourth. And one of the reasons, we've talked a little bit about this, one of the reasons that I do psychedelic journeys is because of that. Because, you know, last week I did a journey using psilocybin and MDMA with my Greek-American shaman in Harlem. And it's literally a dress rehearsal for death. It's an out-of-body experience that takes me to the edge of the universe. And now, to get back to filmmaking, the way I learned about this was through making the film I'm Dangerous with Love.
You know, I'm going to hold it right there because I want to get very deep into what you're saying, but I want the audience to see a trailer from Dangerously with Love so that they really could get the gist of what we're saying when we get into this.
Okay,
Okay,
absolutely.
so here's the trailer.
But staying clean it's for you, from you, but it's also gonna take help, bro. Your whole lifestyle is based around fucking drugs, man.
Tired, I'm really tired. I tried everything to quit.
It's chaos. It involves crime. It involves elements of death, you know, physical danger. I fucking love it. And I will continue, I don't, you know, so it's this element of chaos that's always been in my life. Things are going good. I want to mix it up. Got the sacrament in my pocket. And I'm glad to see you. Got the sacrament in my pocket. And the weekend right here. His skin's blue-black and his tongue's beet red. He says, these ain't visions, these is my friends. The weekend right here, the weekend right here. Hey, 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 hey. Even though I've done over 100 of these, I was not prepared for this and I acted really badly.
That was the trailer from Dangerously with Love. Before we saw the trailer, we were talking basically about that inner journey that we as middle-aged adults, that we do start to reflect on that otherness that exists, right? So can you elaborate on that some more?
Well, in reference to the film or in reference to
Both,
my other? Okay.
both.
Well, let's start with the film, and because that was a journey in and of itself. By the way, you know, when I start a project like this, I have no idea where it's going to take me. And I had made Methadonia, which was on HBO, and I got a big response from the film. And I got emails from some people saying that I had to look at this psychedelic called Ibogaine because it was being used to treat addiction. And my first response was, I've just spent, 3 years looking at the world of drug users, and I'm pretty worn out. I'd like to do a comedy, something else. But there was one person in particular who wrote me a number of emails and And I gradually, and then finally what happened is people kept saying to me, you've got to meet this guy named Dimitri here in New York. He's part of this Ibogaine underground. You've got to meet Dimitri. And finally, after making some phone calls and going into the underground, which was not as difficult to access as I thought, I met Dimitri.
But how underground is it now
not
that it's been all over? All over.
But this was more than 10 years ago, and people were maybe a little more concerned. But anyway, I finally meet Dimitri. I think I talked to him for 10 or 15 minutes. And I look at him and say, I've always wanted to make a film about someone named Dimitri. Dimitri's my father's name. And he laughed. And that's where it started. I mean, I met Dimitri. I knew that he had been a drug user. I knew that he had not used for several years, and all because he had gone through one Ibogaine journey or treatment in Holland, maybe 3 or 4 years earlier, and then come back to America, had been trained in the underground to take drug users through Ibogaine treatments here in America. And most of those treatments were done in motel rooms outside of New York City, outside of Boston. And in one, we went all the way to Canada to do an Ibogaine treatment with 2 brothers who wanted to do it in Canada because it wasn't legal in Canada, but it wasn't illegal either. In America, Ibogaine is a Schedule I drug, and it is illegal. And even now, it's illegal. And ironically, being a Schedule I drug means that it has no medicinal properties.
What's fascinating about Dangerous
With Love.
with Love is that we watch Dimitri's journey as well. He is the person who sees himself as a healer, getting people off of heroin. But I see a transformation in him to be more of a spiritual leader by the end of the film. And to me, a more powerful individual by the end of the film.
Yeah, when I started the film, Dimitri and I knew that there was an African connection to Ibogaine, and that it came from the root bark of a plant in West Africa, the iboga plant. But we didn't really know that much more. And during the course of making the film, because a young man almost died in Canada while he was going through a Ibogaine treatment, Dimitri was so rattled and upset, and so was I, that we sort of both decided we had to go to Gabon, where Ibogaine, or more specifically iboga, is a sacrament in a very old religion called Bwiti. So that's what took us to Africa and to Gabon, and we spent several weeks with a Bwiti shaman. And that's where a Bwiti shaman said to me about the drug crisis in the West, and he said, in America they have forgotten how to dance in the village. And he said that's the real cause for addiction and drug use in the West. And I think it was an incredibly insightful statement. Furthermore, Dimitri, when we went to Africa, decided to be initiated into the Bwiti religion, and that's a part of the film.
And I'm glad that's a part of the treatment, because there is something about that addiction, that there's a spiritual component that's missing, whether it's Catholicism or Buddhism or, Vodun or Witi or whatever, but the human spirit is something that needed to be nurtured or groomed to really, thoroughly get out of an addiction, I think.
No, I think you're right. I think it is the spiritual connection, and also, first of all, an iboga or ibogaine journey. It's a psychedelic drug. I took it. You see me on ibogaine in the beginning of the film, and it is by far the most intense experience I have ever gone through. And the Bwiti say that when you take iboga, it breaks open the head. And it's as if you are released into the universe. Your molecular structure becomes one with the universe. And clearly there's something incredibly spiritual about the idea of returning, to the earth. I mean, we're stardust, our atoms are 5-10 billion years old. And when you are on a psychedelic journey, as you are with Iboga, you return to the elements and become one with the universe. I mean, I know that sounds sort of like New Age baloney.
Well,
But honestly, it's not.
Depends who you're talking to.
No.
It makes perfectly good sense to
Well,
me.
thank you. I mean, I know there are a lot of skeptics, and so I'm trying to address that. And I was maybe a bit of a skeptic myself. And I think I took Iboga because I wanted to understand how this could possibly help someone who was using heroin. And it became very clear.
We have 2 minutes left. This is a subject that I definitely wish we had more time to get into. Can you give the audience, I guess, contact information of where they can see this documentary, this film?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Methadonia is a film that is still handled by a distributor. You can still buy a DVD, and it's available on some of the streaming sites. I believe it's on iTunes and Amazon, but I'd have to double check. And then I'm Dangerous with Love is still in distribution, but I got permission from the distributor to put it up on my Vimeo site. So you can actually go to Vimeo, and I guess you type in my name on Vimeo, and you'll find my Vimeo page, and you can see I'm Dangerous with Love free. And I wanted it to go out there to as many people as possible because I think it's a subject that people should know about.
Okay, so I know this is a show about art, but I'm encouraging those in the social work field or who are drug counselors to take a look at those movies because they will definitely inform how you do your job. Thank you so much for appearing on Corinne's Picks, and definitely we'll do a second segment, part 2.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
At a party.